Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my second book, The Magic Sugar from Java. It's a novel. It reflects my experience of falling in love with Indonesia and falling in love with an Indonesian lady and slowly recognising that she has been taken from me either through black magic or simple criminality. Or is it simply my descent into madness? Whatever, it's still a novel. Any resemblance to real people is unintentional. But of course it's based on my experience. And yes, it's based on people I know. But amalgamations or caricatures of them. I do mention real celebrities and hope they will forgive me, along with any of my family and friends who believe that they have identified themselves. All alone in my hell. There are many people I can blame for the situation which my family and I now find ourselves in. But should I not look at myself and how I've contributed towards the destruction of this loving family? After all, this is the second time I have destroyed a family and with it young people's lives. All the time I was focusing on Made, supporting her, praying that she would get better. Titi and Widati had entered into similar depression and our panicky, unpredictable behaviour only adding to our problems. I simply wasn't there for them as I wasn't for my son Branwell when he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. My own failings were alluded to by Pa Ustad from Claton when he removed Pa Anggabaya's stubborn spirit from Made. He told us that such things could not happen if we were without sin, and now I really understood. For we, and still are, sinners, especially if we include remiss. It's just that our beliefs told us that we were unimportant and they were good people. You see, we all carry with us a philosophy which justifies our actions and tells us that deep down we're good people. But if we use the word sin instead of bad, then things are much clearer. In fact, the most heinous crimes are justified by the perpetrator's belief system, questioning my commitment to moral relativism. Yes, we have suffered horribly, but for once I must approach this as an adult and provide moral and spiritual leadership to my family so that we can overcome our turmoil. And that probably is the point of all that is happening. It's not about how inhumane Indonesians are, and believe me, they can be. When you know them, they're nothing like those you meet on a 2-week holiday in Bali. Nor indeed is it all about how people are plotting to completely destroy me. It's all about how strong we are in our beliefs and morals, and to date the answer is not very. All that we have experienced is a test from Allah. It is not that we judge what is good. It is not for us to judge what is good and evil, simply to submit, and when we really have submitted, we will be free. Do you know where we're going and where you're going to? Bram Stoker, Dracula. As a child, I went to a Church of England primary school and attended Sunday school. I learned right from wrong, but each time I experienced wrong, especially against me, I refined my beliefs just a fraction. Unlike at my Uncle Norman's house in Liverpool, I had no recollection of the Old Testament ever being discussed in my village Sunday school. I don't think the parishioners were particularly low church, but neither were they high. Maybe the New Testament was considered more appropriate for children. Certainly, how I recall how I enjoyed tales of the Good Samaritan, the wedding in Cana, feeding the 5,000, and above all, the Sermon on the Mount. Perhaps it was the threat of the cane that kept me on the right path, but I doubt it, as it was rarely used at the primary school, unlike the grammar school, where it was much a tradition as ritualised bullying and initiations. But even at the small village school, the threat of corporal punishment was felt essential in reinforcing time discipline. Whilst we no longer took the day off on hearing the first cuckoo, the sight of a jasper wasp disrupted maths lessons for at least 20 minutes, and the sound of thunder sent at least half of the class under their desks until it had passed. The winter of 1962-3, the first winter Shropshire had ever encountered, provided us what we had always sought: time off school to play, and how we relished sledging down hills and snowballing in place of Jack and Jill and our timetables. At grammar school, a handful of teachers took a little too much pleasure, verging on arousal, in inventing ever more humiliating punishments for their charges, including a French teacher who wore a treed cape a little like Jeremy Thorpe's or Basil Rathbone's Sherlock Holmes, and would pull down boys' trousers and underpants and spank them over his knee in full view of Class 3B. I should add here that it never did us any harm, and we promptly ended up better people because of it. But did we really? I will never know the truth of how our lives would have been without the threat and use of ritualised violence. There are somewhat good academic reasons for grammar schools, countered by somewhat better academic reasons for not having them. But do the advocates of returning to grammar schools also advocate once again appointing sadistic paedophiles to guide the nation's bright young things? Whilst at grammar school, I became an altar boy at St Chad's, Shrewsbury's liberal Anglo-Catholic church, a tradition to which I was extremely suited. I recall how impressed I was by the Sermon on the Mount, but never realised how I had returned to it in my later life. But as soon as I got to university, it became apparent that my faith was incompatible with my study. Even now, what has happened to my family and I has shocked and dismayed me. You see, I never really believed that humans could be so cruel to each other. Of course, we all learn about cruelty and shameful episodes from history, but it only really becomes real when we ourselves experience something. Just as a child, when met with inhumanity, it took time to come to terms with it. But as a child, I modified my behaviour to fall in with what I perceived to be the herd. Now I really have learned what is wrong. What is wrong, and to rise above it, not hide behind moral relativism. This really is the purpose of life, or at least mine, and it has taken something so dramatic for me to learn this lesson. The deanery in my childhood village had been given to the Diocese of Hereford on account of it needing additional worshippers. Not that there were many in the arid north. Nevertheless, His Grace was always delighted to see how well his northernmost school did in the annual scripture exams, especially as there had been a rumour that the fund for the Easter visit to the cathedral had been commandeered by the PTA for a bus trip to Batley Variety to eat tripe in a basket with Eartha Kitt. The bishop had no idea that my success in the annual exams was not fuelled by the prospect of kissing his despicable ring, receiving my signed Bible, nor indeed seeing the Mappa Mundi once again. In fact, I was far more fascinated by the chains on the books in his library. No, I was hoping to witness His Grace with a bow and arrow executing Welshmen for stealing 9 3/4 ounces of Cheshire from the Church Stretton Co-op's deli counter. Unfortunately, His Grace never obliged. But there were many further successful brush trips, including the famous night when a drunken church warden fell off the stage at Jolly's in Stoke, whilst attempting to provide backing vocals to Dirty Old Man for the 3 Degrees. The warden made matters worse for himself by claiming that he was pushed by the Duke of Cornwall, who was also on stage, busily inviting all 3 Degrees to a nightclub in Tunstall called the Golden Torch, which his Auntie Margaret had told him stayed open all night. The very same warden was later banned for life from Jolly's and prospectively from Shelley's, which had only occurred once previously to the entire staff of Liverpool's De La Salle Grammar School. I have been unable to substantiate what I must write off as a 5 Towns apocryphal, that the entire academy academic and ancillary staff from Madeley College of Education suffered from the same sanction. It has been said that Ian Sludgley's was incandescent, as halfway through its over, Roy Orbison tripped over the warden in front of a crowd of 1800. Fortunately, the dean managed to hide the incident from the chap. I remember as a teenager being given some tickets for a college dance to sell, but some older boys, whom I'd called friends, stole them from me. I was mortified and forced to steal money to pay for the tickets. This was the same dance that a young Mary Beard had one too many cherry bee and ciders, and got in a fight with another girl from the high school over the correct pronunciation of Boudica. It was around this time that I realised that it was impossible not to break the law of the land, or at least in not some small way. The knowledge that the law was a sham added to my confusion and lack of moral certainty. When I first started working full-time and found the directors of a subsidiary of one of the UK's largest conglomerates ordering employees to act in breach of the law, I had already begun to chip away at those beliefs I was taught as a child. In fact, far from whistleblowing, I followed my orders. Why? Well, despite having grown up in the 1960s, I was taught to respect authority. These were ex-public school boys, ex-army officers, my directors, my betters. Like even today, when I disagree with my parents, the only rebellion I know is that of the naughty child, and can never challenge their authority as the adult that I am. Like the eternal validation seeker, I have never really grown up, although maybe, just maybe, as I approach 60, I can finally free myself from the learned behaviours of a selfishness and approval seeking. On my first solo visit to see my mother, she confided in me that my dad had been sacked from his job at a French hypermarket for whistleblowing, which I am in awe of. Like me, his career and livelihood was snatched from it at an early age, but hopefully God will look kindly on. Despite the setbacks, I retained a strong conviction that I needed to achieve something for the benefit of mankind, which I later wrote off as egotism. Indeed, Piaget sees it as the messianic complex, which develops into champion lost causes that I have barely escaped. Then when I went to work in Saudi Arabia and witnessed industrial scale corruption, I again modified my views to correspond with how the real world was and not how it should be. But what really disenchanted me about business was when working as a business consultant in America. I realised that the company was really a front to launder money for the mafia. Now, many of the bullies who were still in Indonesia were conned out of their life savings almost as soon as they stepped off in the plane. But instead of continuing to strive honestly, they too have become confidence tricksters. Not that I'm accusing Davina of being a confidence trickster. No, she's a serial victim. But she tells a story of arriving in Indonesia and giving a middle-class lady $500. The lady claimed that she needed it for her son's university fees. But at the time, $500 was more than a year's wage in Indonesia. The lady will never have considered Davina kind nor generous, made no attempt to repay the money, and of course never will. No, Davina's gullibility will have been the subject of Ibu mornings in Pondok Indah ever since. When a thing is corrupted, its corruption is evil, because it is, by just so much, a privation of good. St. Augustine. After my ex-partner became pregnant with Branwell, she refused to have bleep with me. I was working away in Birmingham, unable to see much of my baby son. In a quest to control me, I'd already lost most of my friends and had nowhere to turn. It was in my depression I did turn to drink, not least to depress my libido. Was it then that I became infected with a drive for the ephemeral? Previously I had been corrupted. but led my life as an optimistic hedonist who did care for others and had many friends, but like a vampire's kiss, this was all sucked from me. I remember hearing a voice in my head saying how much money you have, over and over in a Birmingham accent. At the time it seemed to me that Birmingham was built on money and the pursuit of money, but little else, in contrast to Manchester, which was about the pursuit of pleasure. In Birmingham, I witnessed and learnt the artless procedures of greed. Making money is simple. You just need to be more ruthless than your fellow man. Until that time, I had balanced my hedonism with hard work, culture, and a concern for others. But in Birmingham, Prometheus was unbound, leaving me so one-dimensional, seeing myself in competition with my fellow man. I now seemed to have no time to enjoy culture, relax, even to simply enjoy. And so, in Fritz Lang's Metropolis, getting drunk was an attempt to cheat time, just as my friend Jeff had. But ultimately, drinking to drown my sorrows becomes sorrow with your drinking. I may have been agnostic before I went to Birmingham, but I left with money as my God, the same God that people worship in Jakarta, whilst calling him Allah. Being rewarded for the illogical, I developed the narcissism of what I believed to be self-interest and how I perceived the world to be. Inevitably, I fell into living my new life in what Nietzsche describes as the empty values of the herd, content in my banal existence of timid mediocrity, believing the religion of comfortableness. I was tranquilized by the trivial. It had taken my near-death experience of staring into the abyss and seeing the abyss staring back at me, and I had given up on the pursuit of hollow goals. Once again, I am following the logic of doing the right thing, something I was born with, but allowed my desire to seek the self to throw me off course, even drawing on a collection of excuses to defend my hypocrisy. We're all born knowing why we are here and what we are here for, but being reliant on others, we learn manipulative behaviours to forget about our knowledge. An extraterrestrial being, newly arrived on Earth, scrutinising what we mainly present to our children in television, radios, movies, newspapers, magazines, the comics and many books, might easily conclude that we are intent on teaching them murder, rape, cruelty, superstition, crudity and consumerism. Carl Sagan. Slowly we begin to see others as bad, some as evil, not seeing the good in them, and even slower the world becomes unnatural and dangerous. We even see selfishness as natural and therefore the way we should be, despite deep down knowing this not to be true. Maybe this was the real reason for my drinking, as it was Jeff. We have been sold the cult of the individual, that we are unique and therefore driven by self-interest, without ever questioning whose self-interest this really is. Some of us even believe that we need tough laws and a strong force to regulate the evil in others, never realising that evil breeds evil and good creates good. This is a cycle which leads us to constantly change our beliefs until we too are committing acts that others would call evil, whilst we still believe that we are basically good people, even that we are rational in our goodness. This is because, like Carl Jung observed, to the Western imagination, evil is something which is external to them, but not to Indonesians who follow a Buddhist tradition and believe that it is an internal struggle. But of course, we have all sinned and committed evil acts because this is a part of our learning on earth. Just as Nietzsche believes we cannot be happy without experiencing sadness, we cannot know goodness without knowing evil. Indeed, we only alter our beliefs to correspond to the world as we have experienced it, rather than the world as we know it should be. But then, there are some actions we commit while still believing to belong. We ultimately give up these contradictory activities or engage in rationalisation, which seems to even ourselves to be an excuse, but ultimately we end up really believing and incorporating it into our worldview. Eventually, what were once vices become habits which we justify from our colossal switchboard of excuses. It is this personal dungeon of misinformation which leads to acts which appear evil, with the perpetrators believing they're not responsible, even that the victim probably deserved it. After all, they too are victims. It's been a long journey, but just as Nietzsche prophesied, the crisis of Dionysian excuses left me with Apollonian rationale to comprehend what had happened to me. But even more poignant is the title of Milan Kundera's novel and partial critique of Nietzsche, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. As an academic and knowledge entrepreneur, I became a brain for hire, never really using my brain to contemplate life's more profound issues. I now realise how partial moral relativism is. Religion actually provides us with clear certainties on how we should live our lives, and no amount of extenuating circumstances changes this. As always, Martin saw things slightly differently. He explained to me that when we are born, we carry with us the experience of 7 generations of ancestors, presumably including their sins. We can never understand what it is we carry with us, but it is our destiny to try to overcome them by devoting our lives to God. This would seem to imply that our ancestors are reincarnated in us. Later, he talked about people coming back as rocks. I don't know if this was literal, but it does imply a belief in reincarnation. But this is not the point in time. It's not even something I care to reflect on. No, because it's not because it's not important, but because I am still considering good and evil. So if my experiences have forced me to abandon moral relativism, even conspiring to make me do so, where does that leave my view there is no evil? In tatters, of course. I will still use the word evil sparingly, for what I have learned is to be much more precise in my choice of words, avoiding the sensationalism that has always characterised my writing and speech. Indeed, only Allah has the right to really assess what is good and evil, and I am not submitting if I judge others. Maybe also we really don't understand good and evil, as that is Allah's preserve. Indeed, when we consider evil, we may in the future consider good and vice versa. Evil is a word which is used too frequently to describe that which is merely bad or very bad. No, it has to be used much more sparingly for actions which are truly dehumanising and inhumane. Even then, it could be temporary evil. Indeed, to a Muslim, we really don't believe in duality of fighting evil, but see it more as a lack of submission to Allah or a life without Allah's blessing. Such actions can only occur when people are following a philosophy which promotes the dehumanisation of individuals. Although both social Darwinism and racism do promote evil actions, I would reserve the description of evil philosophy to evil itself. Then such actions are no longer temporary. For what I have discovered is that there are some people who commit evil acts not for power, money, sex, etc., but simply because they want to be evil. It is the pursuit of evil that is evil itself. Now I am closer to the view of the moral universalists, unprepared to completely move to moral absolutism with its intellectual straitjacket. Indeed, I now understand that everything has a thesis and antithesis, so replacing relativism by absolutism simply compounds my errors. What is evil? Killing is evil, lying is evil, slandering is evil, abuse is evil, gossip is evil, envy is evil, hatred is evil. To cling to false doctrines is evil. All of these things are evil. And what is the root of all evil? Desire is the root of evil. Illusion is the root of evil. Buddha. Can there be necessary evil? Well, yes, in the sense in which Martin Luther proposed it, but not in the common sense understanding of the term. If to hate is evil, then hating the devil is necessary evil. But I do not hate Pa Angabaya at all. In fact, I love him. But it was necessary for me to allegorically smother him to death for us to be released from his evil. Only time will tell if this has actually worked, but it certainly seemed to have. So why do I not do the same to Uni? Because I still cannot bring myself to love him. No, I find him abhorrent. So symbolically killing him is itself evil. You see, this former parking attendant is too cunning for his own good. He thought he could cheat Pesugian by offering sperm and unborn babies. It worked remarkably well, raising the stakes and trapping him in a hell of his own volition, which of course is exactly what hell is. So now he is left to destroy my family and I, or anticipate the same. He is petrified of Maddie and myself, and even more so of Nera Blorong. He deserves my pity, and when I can find it, I can reach the final metaphor, but not until, as Uni is a fellow for whom the flood forgot. I'm not even considering piety, as I believe him to be an imbecile, a xenophobe, a misogynist, a sad man who deserves my pity. But he is not evil. Nevertheless, his hubris means that he still persistently sits outside our house, trying his utmost to kill us, or maybe Uni is paying him to do so. If one does not understand a person, one tends to regard him as a fool. Carl Jung. In many ways, piety is no more and no less than many patriotic Indonesian males. So to see him as evil is to see the nation as evil, which despite my current doubts, I am forced to conclude that it isn't. Nevertheless, the Gnostic personality type of Woden does describe most Indonesians. They can never be happy because they are so consumed by materialism, deluded that they are poor and that their country is poor, and that the grass is always greener. Therefore, surely the devil, Iblis, exists. Well, I cannot be sure, but any entity which is deified holds a certain power, and after God, the devil must hold a lot of power. Jung sees evil as the dark side of God, which feels to be much closer to what I've experienced than the concept of evil I was taught at Sunday school. This reflects the need for an entity within monotheism to explain the evil in the world. Indeed, the devil seems to me to be a Heathcliff, and not unlike Milton's Satan, which is Milton's or our own failings. But I had reached Milton via Blake, and still find it to dissociate Satan from the horrors of industrialisation, despite knowing that I must. For I spent my time moving forwards to William Morris, not contemplating the antecedents of the Romantics. Whilst I have had periods of living a playboy lifestyle, I have never really taken women for granted and always respected them. However, for a brief period, I became cerebrally manipulative, preying on female insecurities, as the Preman had with Titi. There is no defence, but there was a Heathcliff I met in Corfu who had used these tactics when meeting women. Somehow I was impressed by him and his silver tongue. Now I'm sure that this blonde Lothario from Nottingham was no Satan, and was no more badly intentioned than I. But this is the subtlety which Milton describes. Indeed, was he really evil? Certainly some of his actions were not pure, but he only tempted me to follow. So if he was evil, so was I. Of course, mothers will always claim that their sons were led astray, but on reflection, a refined message, and I am so impressionable. I got my just desserts from a professor and the head of the department I was studying for my master's in, as he refused to allow me onto the doctoral programme, despite being promised this and a grant. You see, he'd overheard my manipulative behaviour with women in the department and probably changed the trajectory of my life completely. You begin to research occult and Satanism, you come across conspiratorial theories and the New World Order. But like when I came across links to aliens, this is when I choose to follow a different research trail. So maybe my analysis is partial, missing the bigger picture. So when you look at Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, even the thoughts of Aleister Crowley, there is much that grafts onto the belief system so many of us hold. Mostly it's about self-interest, independence and moral relativism. Is this the Heathcliff Satan? That so much of what is evil has already been incorporated into our beliefs, and therefore it is easy to be seduced further into greed and inhumanity. Such beliefs ultimately lead to seeing oneself or a group one belongs to as above other humans, above the law and above punishment, including racism and social Darwinism. Here lies the problem with Heathcliff's seduction, as indeed my thoughts. At what point do we decide we have gone too far if we have rejected moral absolutism? Heathcliff was an intuitive choice to illustrate my point, as where a car park for Bradford College now sits was the Temple of Horus, built by members of the Golden Dawn, remarkably close to where I used to DJ at all-nighters, although the temple was later moved to Goodwin Street. It remains that evil acts committed by people following the devil are only evil acts if they forget God. So many of the acts committed against us are not evil, simply misguided. For my experience seems to be evil is often carried out by seemingly good Muslims, following another person or entity's wishes rather than Allah's. Again, when I worked in Saudi Arabia, I was shocked that homosexuality was completely taboo, but buggering young boys was reputedly quite common, albeit completely devoid of love and simply an abuse of power. Of course, that is the devil's only authority to suggest to man that they commit such acts, but it is only becomes permanently evil when it is followed for the sake of evil. That is what Pa Ustad from Claton meant when he talked about sin. For Maddie and I must have fallen under the devil's power, as if we had followed Allah. This would have been impossible. In my own case, I now realise that my years of agnosticism, which under the influence of my former partner fringed on militant atheism, was exactly this. Certainly the evil my family and I have been subjected to appears to be the work of the devil, but this is a conclusion I am yet to draw. Evil is like being surrounded by flames. The flames are consuming you and everything that is life, and there is no way out. Manya Brower, Holocaust survivor. I needed to get to Block M, to my bank and to the currency exchange on Monday. So Monday was the first day that I had available. Still fighting utilities and financial services companies, I also needed to do some printing on the Tuesday and go to the post office on either Tuesday or Wednesday, prior to setting off for Claton on Thursday to meet Maddie on Friday at the psychiatrist's. But Maddie was very bad on the Sunday night. She tried calling me, but having no charger at her cost, my phone was on power saving mode and I didn't hear her. I went back to bed after Farge to be woken early by Titi. Surely she wasn't going to school, having resolved to drop out. Then Lima came round and explained that Titi was going to Gununkedal with Om Cecilio, as Budde had requested. What? Here I am running out of money, and Titi is using Om Cecilio. I explained that if they had to go, then at least wait for me to go to the bank and pack the clothes Maddie had asked me to fetch. but Titi refused, saying that she would use the night bus. So I asked her to buy me a ticket, and she refused. Clearly I was being lied to. She was using Om Sicilio again. Once again, everyone is panicking, the last thing Maddie needs, and spending my money at the same time, slowly creating ever-decreasing circles around my ability to solve the family's problems. I went to the bank and realised that their getting to know your customers message was actually a phishing exercise by Indonesia's intelligence service, or possibly the tax office, to check up on foreigners. Yet I have wasted considerable time and money to pander to the xenophobia of Indonesia's government departments. But the biggest insult is that very name was borrowed from a similar exercise in the United States, which was abandoned once exposed by the press. Unlike the United States, foreigners in Indonesia have no rights whatsoever, and even to describe them as being tolerated is somewhat generous. Again, I am left thinking, can I actually remain in Indonesia any longer? This feeling remained with me for most of the day. The people can always be brought to the bidding of their leaders. That's easy. All you have to do is tell them that they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for their lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same way in any country. Hermann Göring. Eventually I realised that if nobody else, Widati needed me, and actually so probably did Maddie, despite all around treating me as a nuisance or liability. I began to think of my son Branwell and how I wasn't around for him when he finally broke down, and how difficult his behaviour had been for some years previous to the breakdown. I also recall how my savings had been depleted so quickly when Branwell's illness was developing, as he demanded ever more ridiculous items or journeys, and it felt like everything I owned was broken. You see, when somebody close to you starts losing their mind, you first doubt your own sanity, because normal behaviour is defined in reference to one's peers. So when a peer becomes abnormal, it takes time to reassert normality across the group. You then pander to the whims of the person losing their mind, ignoring the destruction around you. Just like now. So maybe the last year has been about Maddie's impeding madness. There is no doubt that the neighbours are using black magic against us, and Maddie is responding to this. But are these simply cultural conditioned responses? Are these packets from a nene, learnt behaviours, even more hypnotic procedures designed to enlist a response when a key is used many years later? Furthermore, like Pa Anggabaya stoking the problem with our neighbours, Maddie's own erratic behaviour has led to further mistrust and misunderstanding. After years trying to negotiate the behaviour of someone who is losing their mind, of spending more money than you can afford, seeing everything around you broken, finding endless illegible notes and pieces of paper, arguing and pleading with them, you begin to resent them, especially for the inevitable sleep deprivation you have suffered, and eventually hate them. I must avoid this trajectory, as I know and understand that all the signs are already here. There is no doubt that others, like Pa Ustad from Puja, had fed us poisons and hypnotised us for criminal purposes. But how could much of what has happened in the last year be Maddie's developing madness and Indonesia's responding through folk remedies such as Ruqyah, which work to agree but fail to undress the underlying madness, maybe even feeding the paranoia. So now I need to go to Gunung Kidul to explain all this, to tell everyone to stop panicking, as this is making Maddie worse. By all means she can have Ruqyah, but not 2 a week if she is not getting any better. Maybe even enlist the help of the psychiatrist, who can help to translate these somewhat difficult concepts for me. Buoyed up and at the same time depressed by my latest thoughts, I called my father, whom I knew was concerned about me, and explained that Maddie had been going mad for some time and that I was now able to see things much clearly. His response came out of the blue when he said that when we visited them, Maddie had told my mother on 2 occasions that I was going mad. Of course, I have considered that I may be going mad a number of times, but this was not my immediate reaction. My father urged me to cut my losses and return home immediately. Unthinkable? Or is it? Why would Maddie tell my mother I was going mad? Yes, I'd argued with my mother, but it's so hard not to. Certainly I had confided in my parents about black magic and seeing ghosts, which Maddie had warned me not to, and she was right, their reaction was not good. But then Maddie keeps telling me not to speak to anyone about black magic and ghosts, which itself is slowly driving me crazy, unable to share and discuss my thoughts with anyone, mirroring Indonesia as a nation where dark secrets have been kept secret for too long, creating a pressure cooker of mistrust, revenge, hatred and fear. What if Maddie really is trying to take my money and doesn't love me after all, as Branwell and my father insist? This would certainly explain the general lack of respect I receive, especially from my family, and particularly the Duke and brother and his children, who have helped themselves to so much of my savings and have done nothing to help Maddie. The more erratic my behaviour has become, the more she could say that I was mad and therefore lose even more respect. It would also explain the attitudes in the kampong towards Maddie, although I don't believe that she slept with Paerte. Then there are the large number of people using black magic or plain criminality against us. It's just Indonesian pack mentality. Seeing Maddie cheat me, they all wanted their share. Of course, for Maddie, it really has gone too far, and she really has lost her mind. Remembering Pa Ustad from Clatten's comments that this cannot happen to someone who has sin, well, surely her sin is big enough for this to be just dessert. But that was Monday night, the very night when such feelings are sent to me. However, for once, this does not seem irrational. In fact, it made real sense. Despite having promised to give up smoking, I had a cigarette to ponder my thoughts. I prayed at home at Maghrib and was reminded that despite feeling it too early, I had metaphorically killed Omuni at Zohar. Of course he would fight back and plant such thoughts in my mind. I needed to go to the Muhammadiyah Masjid at Isa and ask for forgiveness. Even if my thoughts are true, I can still forgive Maddie, and above all, what she needs. We can both repent and may be happy as reformed sinners. You see, I am still lucky in having married a Javanese queen, albeit her domain is no more than FT's, a bar in an upmarket hotel in Jakarta. I have forgiven Maddie just as Western investors keep forgiving Indonesia. For his riches are so abundant, they forget about the last time they were betrayed. Now this really would be poetic ending to my tale. At Isa, Allah's messengers explained that whilst everyone had got Maddie slightly wrong, she wasn't quite the Lucretia that I'd painted her to be. By the time of our official marriage, Maddie realised how her life's dream was exactly that, a dream, as bullies were not unimaginably rich after all. But another dream was that she wanted to be loved, not simply desired, and I gave her that, and she was delighted to reciprocate. Of course, her feelings were, and still are, mixed. She married me for my wealth, only to find that I have little, but she does love me. Over the course of our torment, especially on Monday nights, when we distrusted each other, I had offered many times to leave Maddie, even to leave her my wealth, possibly killing myself, as my life without her was not worth thinking about, and I had nowhere to go. But Maddie was always torn between seeing through her original plan and taking what money I had left and opting for love. a dilemma for most Indonesians, for whom love is an abstract concept related to generosity and money, and the pursuit of money the only thing that matters in life. It would be wrong of me to expect Maddie to suddenly have a Western concept of love, but just maybe I can help her to overcome some of her torment, and we can be happy once more. All in the kampong had picked up on Maddie's deceit. They would have, regardless of it, whether it was real or not, and saw no dilemma in adding to it. Or could there be another one close to me who had betrayed me with equally devastating consequences? After all, if I was stupid enough to allow an uneducated girl to cheat me, then a few others cheating me is nothing. In any case, sending Allah's judgment is justice, not a crime. Yes, we are victims of lies and greed, but a proportion of those lies and greed emanate from Maddie herself, and that is why there is so little remorse for what is happening amongst the perpetrators and all around us. Also, being Indonesian, none will accept any blame and simply point to the actions of others, such as the denial and pack mentality. Now, if Maddie is honest with herself, with Allah, and with me, she can rid herself of her immediate torment, although her mind... I explained all this to Widati, who was distraught, as Budde had once again commanded her to Gunung Kidul, and also explained that the best way to help her mother was to complete her university education and get a good job. Widati did not correct my analysis of her mother, but like me knows deep down that Maddie is a good person. Just like me, Maddie was taught right from wrong, but revised her understanding when met with adversity, even cruelty and callousness. But her biggest sin is not the most obvious. No, this unassuming girl has acted godlike, blaming and judging others for her plight, Omuni, Paanggabaya, etc., albeit that much was induced by her own paranoia. But Maddie, like us all, was born with free will. Her plight is her own creation. It is this aspect of Maddie's thinking that she must free herself from if she is to recover. And even then, as I explained to Widati, it'll take a long time, maybe never fully recovering. Much later, I realised how stupid I was being. Of course Maddie loves me. In fact, Maddie has never loved before and is hopelessly in love with me. Later still, I had a sleepless night in Jakarta, thinking that it was Omuni and not Perte that Maddie had slept with, but awoke laughing at how ridiculous this was. Although for some time now, Maddie has been concerned about my mental health and had expressed these concerns to all around. Even those close to us probably believe that my lack of self-control is responsible for Maddie's madness and maybe also for Branwell's. But this is the sort of trap depicted in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The more I protest my sanity, the more insane I appear to others. So this is why the whole story is about us, and particularly Maddie. You see, Paanggabaya, Omuni are merely bit players. Erte is a stupid, arrogant man who has just been caught up in it all, whilst Ba'ani, Ibu Erte and Ibu Dayanti are merely on the sidelines, influence, assisting, driving, even annoyed by their husbands, but on the sidelines, as in a Victorian novel. On the sidelines, but if driving, may be the true masterminds or cathodes of the events I've described. Nevertheless, I can find forgiveness for Maddie, then so too can I for everyone else. That's why it's all okay for me to metaphorically kill off Paanggabaya and Omuni. I have forgiven them and am merely killing off the evil which has infected them. It is a fact that cannot be denied. The wickedness of others becomes our own wickedness because it kindles something evil in our own hearts. Carl Jung. But the actual struggle really is an internal struggle between good and evil within Maddie and myself. And of course, Maddie's own real struggle with mental illness and with me adapting to this. Am I truly beginning to understand about how black magic works on the mind and its relationship with religion? I do hope so. Years later, I found that Maddie hadn't told my mother that I was going mad, and probably simply agreed with something my mother had said, not comprehending it, or even this was another example of my mother's selective hearing. So I was preoccupied with the untruth for at least 6 months and occupied for a number of years. It's now well over a month since we left Jimba, and presumably since we last ingested hallucinogens and were hypnotised, and slowly my thinking is becoming clearer, my headaches becoming less frequent and troublesome. I also now appreciate that every time we were given advice or sought help, it simply fed the paranoia that had been induced by the hallucinogens. Ultimately, Maddie believed that I was carrying malevolence back to the cost from our house, even hearing demons on the roof of the cost each time I returned. In fact, my troubles seemed to be leaving as pressure leaves the head, like when landing at an airport and one's ears popped, but with the sensation coming and going in waves. I was feeling smug with myself and started to hear someone call hello, a word used in Indonesia, but rarely, and spelt hello in Bahasa. Hello! As Maddie's hallucinations began as audible, I became very concerned. Something was definitely happening to me, but was I getting worse, not better? This would mean that my moments of clarity are actually rare moments within a largely demented mind and not normality returning. Hello! But I realised that it was a PA being tested in a nearby garden where gamelan, wayang kulit and Javanese singing are taught. Hello! Indeed, I reflected that the fact that our neighbours and others were practising black magic only fed our paranoia, especially Paerte sitting outside our house, and then the criminal intent of so many others, which has also fed this paranoia. Hello! By the time it was implied that Pahangabaya was working against us, our paranoia erupted, taking with it our grip on reality. I can certainly trace our poisoning back to before we visited the UK, but cannot be certain that it started well before we were in Bali, now over a year ago. Certainly it was after visiting Bali that I started seeing and speaking to ghosts. Were these just my hallucinations? Then many of the strange illnesses might be explained by poisoning. Remember my description to my doctor of poison running through my body? And my huge defecations, which seemed to relieve me as I expelled some of the poison. Could this be the same relief that Maddie gets from Rukia when sick, expelling mucus and occasionally blood? But if this is the case, that my own poisoning began over 5 years ago when we moved to South Jakarta. I believe these were a different combination of poisons to those now being used and doing the damage. No, the most recent poisons are paranoia-induced, aimed at confusing us. Undoubtedly, it goes a long way to explaining Maddie's memory loss, especially her problems with PIN numbers. Poor Maddie has been the subject of an uncontrolled experiment on a person who has a family history of mental illness, her younger sister having suffered for over 20 years, despite the family seeing it as evidence of the use of black magic. Knowing that our neighbours want us dead and are using black magic will certainly have induced paranoia, especially in Maddie, for whom some of the cues preconditioned this paranoia and led to so many panicked decisions, creating real problems in the family, leading to Maddie's depression. Then, of course, more than anything, Maddie wanted to be loved and to spread happiness, but in our kampong, this is in such short supply. Chasing around looking for solutions only increased our paranoia and problems. focusing away from the family and daily needs and towards our paranoid psychosis. Add to this poisoning with slow-acting hallucinogens, hypnosis and feeding of Maddie's psychosis, and you have a volatile mixture. A mixture designed to induce such confusion that Maddie would give away her jewellery, gold and PIN numbers, and I my PIN number. But Maddie's mind was already so damaged that a reaction was shocking to those inducing it, as it was to TT and I, but especially to Maddie herself. I did not fully appreciate when Pahanga Baya from Puja was insistent on getting medical assistance, as I too was in a state of confusion, but he had realised it had all gone tragically wrong. When talking about black magic, I had been warned so many times not to meddle in what I don't understand. Maybe we need to widen the definition to include inducing paranoia and psychosis in others. The day I left Jakarta, I felt better than I had for a long time and was thinking clearly. Maddie called me and she sounded much improved. It was now obvious that we'd been poisoned with slow-acting hallucinogens. This was the reason for my anger, even contemplating killing Paerte, possibly even me seeing and speaking with ghosts, and my heightened spirituality. Whilst Maddie believed that the black magic, which was undoubtedly being used against us, was working, that she was now possessed, and it was causing all sorts of physical problems. The big question is now how much real danger this has caused to Maddie's mind and how long will it last. Maybe we will only know when she is ready to stop taking the psychotropic medicine. Well, that concludes this chapter from the Magic Sugar of Java. I do hope you liked it. I'm going to attempt to add another chapter every week. In order for you to be notified about it, please subscribe and hit the bell. In fact, I need subscribers and listeners to reach monetization. And I do want feedback, but I also want to stay true to my experiences. I really want to keep things real. So therefore, I don't want to alter the format too much. But above all, thank you for listening. Thank you so much.